Today, we're diving into a really thought-provoking book, one that definitely challenged the optimism after the Cold War. Robert D. Kaplan's The Coming Anarchy, Shattering the Dreams of the Post-Cold War. It really centers on a crucial question. What's America's role? When chaos and violence erupt far away, Kaplan, he's known for shaping the national conversation on these things. He presents this uncompromisingly honest vision. Anthony Lewis at the New York Times called it extraordinarily chilling and, alas, compelling. A world without order.
Indeed. And Kaplan's work, it really pushes back, doesn't it?
Yeah, against that whole idea.
Against that comfortable assumption that, peace and democracy were just inevitably leading us all into some rosier future after the Cold War ended. He suggests something quite different, much more discomforting.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. Kaplan paints this picture, quite stark, really, of a bifurcated world. On one side, you have what he calls the last man. He borrows that from Nietzsche, right?
That's right. Representing the comfortable, maybe complacent Westerner post-history almost.
Someone whose biggest struggle might just be boredom because they've kind of mastered their environment.
And then on the other side, the first man.
The vast majority.
The vast majority, yeah. Stuck in history, fighting this losing battle against poverty, against chaos, just trying to survive day to day.
Kaplan uses this image like a stretched limo in the potholed streets of New York City.
It's powerful.
Yeah, the privileged inside, safe and sound, and everyone else outside going in a completely different direction. It's unsettling. Okay, let's try and unpack this vision then, this fractured world. What exactly does Kaplan see driving this coming anarchy? He points to several key forces, but surprisingly, maybe the environment is right there at the top.
Absolutely. Kaplan flat out argues that the environment is the national security issue of the early 21st century. We're talking surging populations, disease spreading, massive deforestation, soil erosion.
Water shortages.
Critical water depletion, exactly. Air pollution. These aren't just, save the planet ecological concerns for him. He sees them as direct triggers, catalysts for mass migrations and for group conflicts escalating.
That's quite a link. So not just dirty air, but potentially war. How does he make that jump?
Think about places like, say, Saudi Arabia or Central Asia, even parts of the U.S., the Southwest, facing really dangerous water shortages. Kaplan specifically warns about potential wars over the Nile River between Egypt and Ethiopia, for instance. And that's where these environmental fights merge with older ethnic tensions, historical grievances. He references Thomas Fraser, Homer Dixon, a specialist in this area.
Right.
Homer Dixon suggests future conflicts will often spring directly from resource scarcity, water, cropland. And this leads, he thinks, to hard regimes.
Hard regimes, meaning
authoritarian governments, basically. In countries that have dwindling resources, but maybe strong military traditions, he names places like Indonesia, Brazil, Nigeria. And he suggests that any democracy you see in these places might just be superficial. An epiphenomenon, he calls it.
just window dressing, essentially.
Pretty much, not deeply rooted, not really driving change.
And Kaplan points to West Africa as a kind of grim preview of that.
Yes, exactly. West Africa serves as this stark premonition of the future. He describes it as the symbol of worldwide demographic, environmental, and societal stress. Just a hotbed of lawlessness, crime, collapsing states. He mentions Sierra Leone, where a minister told him about this revenge of the poor.
Under the poor.
Yeah, of the social failures of the people least able to bring up children in a modern society. He even mentions Lord of the Flies teenagers running wild, committing atrocities.
Wow, it sounds like the whole idea of a nation state is just crumbling there.
It really is. Kaplan says the political maps of West Africa tell such lies. Governments, like in Sierra Leone, they barely control their own capital city, let alone the country. Rebel armies, huge displacement camps, they take over.
And borders don't mean much.
Borders become meaningless, yeah. You have refugees pouring across. He gives the numbers. 400,000 Sierra Leoneans fleeing into Guinea, while 400,000 Liberians are fleeing into Sierra Leone. It's just chaos.
And basic things just disappear.
Basic services, yeah. Schools, police forces, they just crumble away.
And the environment plays into this urban chaos, too.
Oh, directly. That rapid deforestation, say in Sierra Leone or Ivory Coast, it leads straight to soil erosion, then flooding. And more mosquitoes breeding, which means more disease. Kaplan noticed that pretty much everyone he saw in the West African interior had malaria. And you add to that the social stuff. Rampant polygamy, families breaking down in these exploding cities. It contributes to the world's highest birth rates. And tragically, an explosion of HIV. And this uncontrolled urbanization, the rise of these massive shantytowns, That's central to the anarchy he describes.
So even places that look like success stories can fall apart.
Precisely. Look at the Ivory Coast. It was once hailed as an African success story. Now, a case study in catastrophe. That Paris of West Africa image hides these enormous slums. Places nicknamed Chicago, Washington. 15% of Abidjan's population living in shacks. Cardboard, plastic wrap. No power, no sewage, no clean water.
It's hard to even picture.
He describes kids defecating in streams just choked with garbage and mosquitoes. He tells this one story. Damatesele, a cook, 4 wives, 32 kids. None made it to high school, his little shanty community. Destroyed and rebuilt 7 times. The sheer scale of population growth. Guinea's capital, Conakry, he calls a nightmarish Dickensian spectacle. Black slime, floating garbage. It's pushing nature way far beyond its limits.
So these pressures, the environment, the demographics, they fuel a different kind of conflict, not like traditional wars.
Exactly. Kaplan brings in the military strategist Karl von Creveld. Von Creveld argues that the whole era of state-on-state warfare, the kind that really started with the Peace of Westphalia back in 1648.
The system that defined modern nations' sovereignty.
Right. That era, von Creveld says, is ending. We're actually reverting, Kaplan suggests, to something more like pre-modern conflict. Think medieval Europe, where all the motives, political, social, economic, religious, they're just hopelessly entangled. You can't tell armies from civilians anymore.
And technology doesn't help. It makes it worse.
Frighteningly worse, yeah. Kaplan points out how technology often gets used for the most primitive ends. He talks about that Liberian guerrilla leader, Prince Johnson, filming the torture and murder of President Samuel Doe.
Oh, I remember hearing about that. Horrific.
And then that becomes a blueprint. A copycat execution happens in Sierra Leone. In this future, Kaplan sees political values will mean less, personal security more.
That's a pretty grim outlook. So what about democracy? We usually see that as the answer, right?
Yeah.
Kaplan has that chapter, Was Democracy Just a Moment? That title alone is provocative.
It really is, and it fundamentally challenges that idea that democracy is some kind of universal fix, a panacea. Kaplan argues democracy is a bit like early Christianity. It spreads, sure, but then it adapts to local conditions, and the results are often complex, sometimes violent.
So just because Marxism collapsed,
doesn't automatically mean Western democracy triumphs everywhere. He warns that maybe subtler tyrannies are waiting for us. He also mentions Tocqueville's point about Americans, how our relative equality makes us maybe overestimate human perfectibility.
Interesting. So he's not anti-democracy, but he's saying it needs the right condition. Applying it blindly is the problem.
Exactly that. He stresses democracy can be risky and disastrous if the basics aren't there. You know, high literacy, a stable middle class, maybe ethnic conflicts resolved first. He points to Sudan again. Free elections led straight to anarchy, which then led to a brutal military regime, or Tunisia. He quotes an unemployed student there saying, first create an economy, then worry about elections. First things first.
So it sounds like he's suggesting stability, even if it's authoritarian stability, might sometimes need to come first before genuine development can happen. That's a tough pill to swallow for many.
It is tough, but he makes a case for it, especially looking at these emerging hybrid regimes. He contrasts Venezuela elected government but constant turmoil with Chile under military rule, which saw stability and economic growth.
Under Pinochet.
Or Peru under Fujimori. Quasi-authoritarian, sure, but he brought down inflation, attracted investment. Kaplan suggests that in places with, quote, too many young, violence-prone males without jobs, sometimes radical action is needed just to establish order.
Which leads him to embrace something pretty controversial.
Yeah.
This idea of new authoritarianism.
Yes. And Singapore, under Lee Kuan Yew, is his prime example. He calls it offensive neo-authoritarianism, meaning it's actively shaping society, a centralized, corporate-driven state. Paternalistic, meritocratic, but undeniably not democratic in our sense. But Singapore's prosperity, lifting people out of filth and privation, Kaplan asks, does that count as a human right? It's a provocative question.
And he contrasts that with democratic South Africa.
Right. Despite its amazing democratic transition, it became, in his words, one of the most violent places on earth that are not war zones. High murder rates, huge unemployment, struggling to get foreign investment because of instability.
So the real power players in this world he sees, they aren't necessarily governments.
That's a key observation. He says the real-world government emerging isn't the UN. It's the increasingly dense ganglia of international corporations and markets.
Wow.
He points out 51 of the world's 100 largest economies are corporations, not countries.
That's staggering.
These corporate leviathans, he calls them, are the vanguard of a new Darwinian organization of politics. And they're often free to just move on, leaving social and environmental damage behind, always chasing cheaper labor or resources.
And this corporate power even changes our own societies, how we live here.
Yes, Kaplan sees this shrinking domain of politics even at home. We increasingly opt out of the public sphere, don't we? We retreat into protected settings.
Gated communities.
Malls with private security, private health clubs, yeah. Our cities become more like Singapore's, corporate enclaves, heavily zoned suburbs. He uses the Atlanta Olympics as an example. A virtual army was needed just to protect visitors from crime. He describes Atlanta as fragmented, only superficially harmonious. Even universities, he says, are becoming entrepreneurs, shaping their curriculum based on corporate needs.
This whole picture really challenges our basic ideas about progress, about peace.
It absolutely does, and he tackles that head-on in a section called The Dangers of Peace.
The dangers of peace. That sounds counterintuitive.
It is. His core insight here is really startling. Peace, the thing we all strive for, could paradoxically weaken us. By removing external threats, it might erode the discipline, the sense of purpose that maybe made the West resilient.
To a Cold War.
He suggests the Cold War, because it provided a clear enemy, it gave the West a kind of disciplinary framework, a shared purpose. He calls it as close to utopia as we are ever likely to get.
That's a controversial take on the Cold War.
Very. But his point is about what happens without that external pressure.
And what does happen, according to him.
Peace, he argues, can lead to a preoccupation with presentness. We lose touch with the past, and so we disregard the future. It breeds what Ortega y Gasset called the mass man, self-satisfied, demanding entertainment, convenience, but ignorant of the history and the principles that actually created their comfortable lives.
You can kind of see echoes of that, maybe.
He suggests it leads to shallower leaders, a media obsessed with the immediate, the trivial, he mentions, the huge coverage of Princess Diana's death as an example, focusing on public scandal while ignoring deeper structural problems.
Right.
Even something that seems good, like reducing standing armies, could have a downside. Maybe it just means more gang activity as society's violent element isn't channeled anymore.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Are we seeing bits of this mass man now? The constant demand for amusement, the instant outrage, while big issues just simmer. It's a bit of a chilling mirror. So, given all these forces, this chaos, how does Kaplan map out the future?
Right, the last map. He describes it as a kind of cartography, but in 3 dimensions, like a hologram. It shows overlapping identities, shifting power centers. The real insight there is that the old map, the one with clear nation-state borders, it's dissolving.
So what replaces it?
A much more fluid, chaotic reality, power fragmented across vague regionalisms, powerful city-states, shadowy groups like drug cartels, private security firms.
So we have to completely rethink how we even visualize the world order.
Exactly. He says this map will be an ever-mutating representation of chaos.
Can you give us a concrete example? Where is this last map starting to emerge? Maybe even closer to home than West Africa.
He talks about the Indian subcontinent. Both India and Pakistan, he argues, are becoming increasingly dysfunctional. He notes India's famous Green Revolution came at a huge cost, overworked land, depleted water, and its population projected to hit 1.5 billion by 2025. Pakistan, he says, makes no geographic or demographic sense. It's a patchwork of ethnic groups facing strife over things like falling water tables. Homer Dixon predicts both could actually fall apart into smaller pieces, like a Pakhtunistan, a Punjab.
And even in the U.S.?
Even here, yeah. Kaplan thinks we might become less of a nation. Patriotism might become more regional. Madison's idea of the federal government as an umpire between competing interests might become more relevant than ever.
He doesn't just use political science, though. He brings in thinkers like Kissinger.
Right, Kissinger's observation that liberty is inseparable from authority.
And literature, too. He analyzes Conrad's Nostromo.
Yes, and it's fascinating how he uses it. Nostromo is set in this fictional South American country, Costaguana. It's a perfect literary illustration of his themes. It shows how economic development in the novel, it's a silver mine run by an Englishman, Charles Gould, can actually destabilize everything if you don't have strong institutions.
The resource becomes a curse.
Exactly. It becomes a target for criminals, for factions. Kaplan uses the novel to show these forces playing out in human terms. He highlights characters like Dr. Monaghan.
The cynical doctor.
Yeah, the expatriate doctor who really gets the country's raw, dangerous reality because he's lived through its brutality. He's not naive.
And Nostromo himself, the hero, the dockworker leader. Kaplan has a pretty striking take on his motivations.
He does. He says characters like Nostromo are often driven by personal vanity rather than by ideals.
Vanity, not ideals.
Yeah, like wanting wealth or a woman's admiration. And then Kaplan says something really provocative, that this, surprisingly, can be the true source of incorruptibility. That kind of personal motivation can preserve objectivity far better than the desire to save a million people.
That's quite a statement. It really turns conventional heroism on its head.
It does. And he argues that literature can tell these uncomfortable truths about human nature, about what really drives political action. Truths that policymakers, often coming from more sheltered, idealistic backgrounds, might overlook.
It's a powerful thought.
Yep.
Unsettling, definitely. So let's bring this all back to you, the listener. After diving into the coming anarchy, what's the core message Kaplan leaves us wrestling with?
I think Kaplan's ultimate, really provocative thought is this. True peace and security are impossible, and that may be to the good.
Impossible. And maybe good.
Yeah. He implies that struggle, hopefully nonviolent struggle, is actually necessary. It forces us to demand real facts, real standards of behavior. It's a perspective that encourages us to see that maybe a life of constant effort, facing these huge challenges, maybe that's what defines nobility, not comfortable peace.
So, in essence, the future he describes to the third world, with all its complexity, its danger, its environmental stress, that future may finally be our own. Feels like a call. Not to despair, maybe, but definitely to wake up, to understand the often brutal reality shaping the world, and maybe, just maybe, to be prepared for the difficult work that's ahead for all of us.